Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's Planning Commission meeting. If we could have our invocation by our Mr. Root, please.
Pray with us tonight. Father, thank you for another day on this planet, for giving us the ability to move about, to have relationships, fellowship, community, and move tonight to help make this place a better community, to do it by your wisdom. Staff here can help to do that by giving whatever guidance and experience, whatever that we can to the Planning Commission as they make their decisions, and folks here involved by the community would have your wisdom to have their input, that together we will work for the betterment of this community, betterment of this government, from here, from the small start, through the state, through the nation. In your name, I pray. Amen.
Thank you. Approval of the August 21st meetings or minutes. We have a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I'll abstain from that. I wasn't out here the last meeting. Public comment for agenda. Do we have a list? I was waiting for you. Thank
Sir.
Mr. Markovich.
Good evening, folks. Tom Markovich here. I just have a couple of comments on two different subjects. One goes back to our discussion on the small method area rezoning. One of the questions that came up in discussion at the last Plan Commission meeting had to do with whether or not, regardless of the small method area or the small area method, if there was a minimum requirement for the various zoning districts. And of course, the answer was yes. In other words, there's minimum requirements for the zoning of each specific district. However, that is not the practice of Oconee County, okay? Let's look at Stamp Creek. That was about 1,000 parcels that came in at one time. 424 parcels in Kiwi Key do not meet the minimum requirements, period. Port Bass, down on Gladys Circle, 39 parcels are zoned Lake Residential. Only about 5 of them meet the requirement for Lake Residential. And there's other areas in this. So, I mean, I think these zoning requirements are more suggestions. They're not really required. They're just supposed to maybe be. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was this corridor overlay. I'm waiting to kind of watch it develop. But one of the first things I noticed that is being said that it's going to be a land development regulation. I totally understand land development regulations. But then it says the appeals would end up going through the Zoning Board of Appeals. Now here again, we are confused by the fact of land development regulations get appealed to the Planning Commission. Zoning gets appealed to the Zoning Board of Appeals. We seem to have problems with confusing that matter, and so I just thought I'd bring it to your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Staff updates?
Yes, sir. So as people may have noticed if they were awake at all in the last few days, we had quite a large storm come through. So we've definitely put in some building permits, things like that, but I was attached to the Emergency Operations Center to go out and assess damage. And I took a bunch of photos during it. And even though as you drive through a lot of the county, you don't really, you see trees down, you see things like that, but there's some damage that's hidden in various places. So I just thought I'd update you on that. This is the map that I was given. These are the properties I had to go look at. There's no real cluster of where the damage was per se. I was completely spread out. All but one of them was directly related to a big oak tree falling on something. It was all oak trees, all falling on stuff. One mobile home had wind damage, direct wind damage. So there's this house. You can see the roof line is a little wonky at the top. Sorry for the quality photo. That's the tree that fell on it, and that's what happened. The gentleman who's a builder there said the back wall separated from the rest of the house. So there's that. This gentleman, that's 3 oak trees in a row that all fell over onto this gentleman's house. And these 2 houses are kind of near the lake, down Kiwi School Road, give or take. He can't find someone to come pull the tree off because it's a crane work. Like, it's such a big tree, they don't want to start cutting it away. This gentleman, he just bought that mobile home a small time ago, and the wind just ripped the roof off of it. This is up Highway 11. This was the biggest oak tree, I think, in the county. Probably fell down on this carport and those 2 cars. It was 8 feet around, if not more, and also knocked out their personal power line. House on the lake, one of the smaller lakes up the mountain, fell through. This is in Utica, big oak tree. They were sleeping in that first window on the right side when that tree fell on the house. That house might be totaled. But yeah, I just want to share the photos with you, just keep you all aware that there's some people who are missing parts of their house. That's all I have for that.
Do you have anything else? Or-
No, not for really staff work. We were busy with doing that for the last week and
Understandable.
getting ready for it. We've definitely put out some building permits. Nothing really has come in so far with Epic or, I saw on the news that Epic, not Clemson Epic, Lake Hartwell Development did the land swap and is doing some additional housing in that area, student housing. I read that in the paper.
Condos and a restaurant?
Yeah, that's what I read. So,
Okay. Moving on, we'll go to the County Council and Planning Commission workshop.
So, council wants to do October 24th. This is Tuesday. They're used to it. We already got one person who's not unable to attend. Is everybody else ready and willing to attend on the 24th? It'll be here.
I'll do the best I can. My
Okay.
whole family will be out of town except me, so I'll be on calf delivery, sheep
Oh.
delivery.
Well, we can come back.
Chicken house alone.
We can come to your house and do. We'll have a lot of hands doing it. All right. So as far as I can tell, this will be about the corridors mostly. With your permission, I'd like to kind of print out some large-scale maps of the various corridors.
I'm wondering if maybe we should, I know it's already scheduled, but I wonder if maybe we should see if we could reschedule it. If Gwen's not gonna be here,
No, I'll be here, barring an
but there's a
emergency.
chance you might not be here.
There's a chance, but
I won't be here, and she won't be here, so we'll be down to possibly just 4
Okay.
on there.
So I'll ask if they can reschedule. Reschedule. So I'd like to bring some maps and things like that with y'all's permission, just so you have some visuals versus saying, hey, around that bend up around the piece. And then we have the ordinance tonight. If we could get through tonight half of the ordinance, next meeting the other half, and then put it all to kind of just get some ideas. Even if we all don't agree on every single point, at least we have like a framework. So like I'm bringing you stuff, we can bring council stuff. Just to give like talking points, and like we can guide council as to kind of the way y'all are thinking. So if that works for y'all, works for me.
maybe good.
So I will ask for a reschedule.
Okay.
See if there's some other times available or dates. What other dates would work for the 4 that are guaranteed to be there, or 5 or 6? What are some other? Are there any other particular days of the week that are good for anyone? Or evenings of the week, I should say.
Not necessarily. Just virtually any time.
Okay.
Just,
I've got an obligation the first and third Monday evenings.
First and third Monday evenings, first and third. Oh. I'll get that for you, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So we can discuss that when we get back down to our number 8 on there, so.
Yes, sir.
So we can go to our discussion of small area rezoning movement from August 21st. So I was not here at the last meeting. I understand that was tabled until this meeting. The meeting before that, we had a vote, and it passed. And then we had some conversation of members and wanted to revisit this.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, at this point, essentially it was put back on the agenda last time, so that, for the planning commission, that operates kind of as a motion to reconsider it. So it's in front of the commission, because there's only 4 members last time, and it's decided to table, to bring the discussion back before y'all. At this point, someone just needs to make a motion to call it from the table, and then a second, and y'all vote on that, and it's back to where you were.
Okay.
Before you passed.
Do we have a motion?
Make a motion, we bring it back up for discussion.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Frankie, I think you've had a lot of input on this. Would you like to lead on this?
I wasn't very happy with the 100 acres. The purpose of lowering it down, at least my purpose for lowering it to 50 acres, was to make it a somewhat easier for smaller groups, people that don't own 100, 200 acres of land, to be able to zone if they so choose. We've got a paper here somewhere that shows like subdivisions. Our average size subdivisions are around 50, 51, 52 acres. If a subdivision as it stands now, they're in control free, but if they wanted the so-called protection that zoning provides, they're stuck. They won't get it unless they do covenants or deed restrictions and things like that. With the 50-acre minimum, they would be able to, the developer or the residents in that subdivision would be able to zone it residential or traditional rule or whatever they wanted to get what protection they wanted. But with it 100 acres, they're not gonna be able to do anything. They're just stay control free, and eventually control free is not gonna be control free, because it's not now. But eventually it's gonna have to have more restrictions, and then they're gonna be stuck, and they won't get what they want if they actually want it to be zoned. As long as we require everyone that is asking for to be rezoned, I think the 50 acres is a better number, and I know from some of the council I've spoken with that they are in agreement with the 50 acres. They wasn't real sure about the 100. They said that's no different than the 200. So that's my point. We need to, if we're gonna do work and discuss things, we need to make sure the council is on board with it, because it makes no sense to send them items and they vote it down. So.
From staff, is there a downside in going from 100 to 50? And maybe I reference, are there people who are asking for or complaining about, in other words, will you get inundated with requests if we continue reducing this number down to 50 or 0 or some other number? We went from 200 to 100. We went from 200 with 50% of the people to 100 with 100% of the people. Are we going to be inundated by requests to change?
So last week, I got the first person who was kind of talking about doing a rezoning, and he just called up because he has a small, about an acre or so lot, but it's in the Lake Overlay District, and it's in the Lake Residential District. It's just by a hair. It's just kind of clips it. And we talked about it, and I brought the process up to him, and he's like, well, 200 acres isn't possible, but, so I could just go ask council? And I'm like, that's, you can do as you like, of course, but that's the only time anyone's ever talked about zoning to me. Not saying that won't happen. If we start putting more restrictions in control-free district, it could perhaps become more prevalent, but rezonings aren't the most common thing in government anyways. So if it becomes onerous, but we get a lot of people asking for it, I would probably just come to you and ask for some changes on how we go about it. Because right now the process is all on me. Somebody comes to rezoning, I write all the letters, I put out all the signs, I do all the notifications. So we would, if it became like a real project for me, I would come come to you with that. But I don't believe so. I don't think any change in it's really gonna make a whole lot of difference in how many people come here, because we have so much control-free district.
The reason I ask that question is one, I don't see John Doe homeowner saying, ooh, I want to change my zoning to something. And then either having enough acreage or getting enough friends involved or not getting enough friends involved. The place where I really see the zoning request would be more involved in commercial, where here's an old area that for some reason got zoned into a residential area, and it's sitting right at the corner of a great future commercial entity. And they've got to go through the zoning request of the signs and whatnot, but all of a sudden now they're in too small of a parcel. Am I misunderstanding how that works?
No, but so what you're talking about, so there's two kinds of zonings. There's initial zoning and subsequent rezoning. The initial zoning is from control-free district to anything else. Subsequent rezoning is from residential to something else. That doesn't have that.
So right now it would be, okay, so it wouldn't be residential, because in residential you can ask at any size. But under the control-free, if it was a small parcel,
You would need 200 if it had a commercial building on it, or if you want to do commercial.
if you wanted a commercial building on it, you couldn't do it
No.
if it was currently control-free?
I misspoke. If you wanted to zone it commercial, you would have to have that 200 acres, from control-free going to anything. But control-free is so wide open that you can.
You're gonna be able to do the commercial
I get
anyway?
people calling from all over the country who do various stuff, the Chick-fil-A people call today. They're like, so what do we have to do? They had a team of guys on the phone ready to process this. And I was like, yeah, you just need to be 10 feet off the back. And it was just like that. They're like, what? Are we speaking to the right person? And I said I didn't know. But we have, control-free district is such a, I would love to have control-free district as a developer. Because it affords a lot of flexibility. So.
Are we trying to fix something here that's not broken and then we're gonna make it worse?
I haven't personally had any problems with it. That doesn't mean there aren't problems with it. It just means I haven't had any problems with it. And I think I asked the permit people, and I asked Scott Carroll, and they only know of, I believe, of one rezoning in the last little while. I believe that was an agricultural rezoning. I think, were you involved with that, Ms. Piscatale? So, agricultural rezoning. It's possible. I mean, future, we're the planning commission, so we're looking towards the future. Just because it hasn't happened in the past doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. You all brought this to me. I don't.
So basically, and that's a great question, because I don't want to sit there and cause a problem. At the same time, as a county, we're not in favor of zoning, and I'm a big fan of not being zoned in a particular way. However, if we are aware that there's a 200 minimum, and there is a guy out there who's going, I really want to protect my farm to stay some kind of farming without a developer coming right up on me, even if my grandkids end up buying that property. I got 185 acres and I can't do it, or in this case now 99 acres and I can't do it by myself. I'm a fan of saying drop it to some number, drop it to 50 and see if that stirs a pot and makes a change. And if it all of a sudden opens up some people that might want some sort of zoning protection, then we've created a good. If we don't see ourselves as creating a bad, I don't know that I want to go to zero makes sense if we're the only county that has some sort of level of not being able to go to rezone. Do we go to zero? I don't know that that's a bad thing, but I think reducing it down to something to see if something changes is not a bad thing.
If you reduce it down to 50, and this gentleman with the Chick-fil-A wants his zone commercially, he's got to get 50 acres to go commercial.
No, he can build his Chick-fil-A in the middle of that 50 acres if he wants to, if it's control-free.
Yep, but if he wants.
And if it's
commercial
already not,
protection-
control-free, correct me if I'm wrong, if it's already something else, all he has to do is ask for his parcel to be changed.
So if he wants to build a Chick-fil-A on a piece of property that's not currently zoned commercial, yes, he would just have to ask. If you want to do that subsequent rezoning.
If it's
there's
subsequent
no.
rezoning, he can put it wherever he wants to.
But from that initial, if you wanted to go, if you
it's
for
in
some reason wanted to.
control-free, he can still put a Chick-fil-A there, because there's not enough restrictions on it to
Right.
impact him. If he's buying in the middle of a residential area and wants to put it on the corner where like on Woodruff Road, where they're taking over some residential areas to widen the road and do those kind of things, then all he has to do is ask, because it's already zoned something other than control-free, so it's a subsequent rezoning. And then he can ask for that single parcel to be changed and it,
Because it's anything else other than control-free.
right.
But in control-free,
He has to have the 200.
If
has
he
to have
wants
the
it
200
zoned.
If he wants it zoned.
So if
he
he wants-
doesn't,
if
he
he's
just
a
wants
div-
to use it for any reason whatsoever that he wants to use it for, under the control-free.
He wouldn't ask for zoning. I mean,
He
you'd be an
It
idiot to
zoning.
ask for
is
zoning.
control-free, actually. The Chick-fil-A is in the control-free district, as it is.
Yeah, if it's control-free, he could put whatever he wanted there. That, the only person who would want to come in and buy control-free would be a land investor, perhaps, who wanted to simply knock out a huge commercial area or a huge residential area or a huge something. But if it's someone who's just investing in a piece of property, if it's already control-free, he can put what he wants to. If he's changing it from if he's purchasing it and it's already zoned, commercial, rural residential, ag, it doesn't matter. All he has to do is come to council and ask, and if it fits land use, the plans, the goals that the county set for areas of the county, and if it fits, and sometimes, as is going on in Greenville now, maybe even if it doesn't fit the local neighborhood, but if it's the benefit of the county or the community, then all they gotta do is change it. Vote to change it.
So it sounds like then, by having a larger number, we're really simply prohibiting. I mean, I'm sitting here trying to go through all the scenarios of, well, why would somebody want to zone here? Why would somebody want to zone there? To me, it would be, it goes back to the agriculture thing. Is somebody wanting to zone themselves in a rural capacity to where nobody can influence them, and they don't have enough property to put that on themselves as a consumer, or as an owner, property owner.
Yeah, that's basically, the people who might want to change would be people who don't want to see massive development around them that they have no control over. And so they would want to protect their property from that massive development around them by simply sticking up a flag that says, this is what I want my land to be. Now, if you want to develop around it, that's fine, but this is what I want. And it goes back, some of you weren't here when we were talking about the ag development area, but if you have an easement or if you have a deed restriction, I don't know if y'all know that the area down 59, where the little creek that comes across the road there was a deed restriction on that property. But when they started building houses on it, somebody bought it and started building houses on it, and nobody researched that deed restriction until somebody said, wait a minute, there's a deed restriction there. You can't put any more houses there. You weren't supposed to put the houses that were there because nobody followed up on the deed restriction. So an easement basically is the same way. An easement is there, but it's hidden. It's in the legal books over there, back there, wherever they are. And somebody sitting out in Atlanta or Chicago or, wherever, looking at the maps on the computer, going, wow, there's a big old chunk of land. They don't know that this piece right here has an easement on it.
Because they can't see it,
Because they can't see
the
the
zoning.
easement. You can see zoning.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
You can see zoning, but you can't see an easement.
Is
You
in all
can't see a
counties,
deed
you see
restriction.
zoning,
Right.
and commercial entities or otherwise are used to seeing that on a county map.
So the only, I mean, to me, the zoning request, if you own property and you're right on 85, obviously you want to fly the flag of commercial development. You want to say, hey, I'm here. I want $85,000 an acre. I want to sell this to some big Toyota plant, But if you're the farmer on the backside of that, you want to be waving the flag that says, I'm agriculture. So please, please, make sure you've got a really thick buffer between your plant in my farm.
I think that we are, if we reduce that number, that we are helping, potentially helping. If we don't get anybody, we don't get anybody. If we get some people that go, wow, finally I can go apply for this because it's a smaller amount, I don't see a negative at the moment in every way I've looked at it in reducing that to say a 50 or smaller.
Yeah, I was torn, you know, because I've seen where zoning worked in places away from here, not, you know, Maryland, Virginia, they're losing ground very rapidly. Farms are losing ground very rapidly to development out of Washington. But in those places, zoning was used as a tool to preserve stuff, and you want to see large areas. I mean, that's what you want to see. You want to see large areas because the people that live in those areas live there because they want to. They like what's there. So to me, if you get too small an area, you're really not doing anything that protects more than a little place, which basically puts that place, you know, and I can only relate to farming because that's what I know. But we have had a very good friend in Charlotte. He owned a huge farm. He doesn't own a huge farm anymore. He sold out a couple of years ago because he couldn't get his tractors down the roads where the subdivisions had grown up around him. So he didn't want to go out of business, but slowly but surely they ate away at the area where he was till he couldn't farm anymore. Not saying that zoning is going to stop that, but the more people that can fly the flag of what they want so that people who are looking from a way far distance away can't say, oh, that's wide open. I could, like the Chick-fil-A people said, really? Nothing? Okay. You know, let's move in. But I mean, I would love to say that, you know, 1 acre could zone itself. But I think that then you get into the legalities of what they call spot zoning, which is illegal, I think, is what we were told way long time ago. So.
Do you want me to chime in on that?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, because it's, sometimes it's confused a little bit. Zoning a spot or a small parcel, maybe spot zoning literally, but it's not an illegal act in and of itself. If you have an agricultural area and council decides, hey, we've got a little parcel that's really right, kind of, let's just say, for example, right in the center of that ag district, and we want to zone it, I don't know, someplace where you can put an SOB, a sexually oriented business, in there, or some sort of commercial development. We want to put that right inside the ag district. It's not consistent with the use of the surrounding land, but we're going to zone that spot because it makes some commercial sense, more tax revenue, whatever, for the county. We're going to do somebody a favor. That's really an illegal spot zoning. Not all of these, you know, if we have an allowing folks to zone smaller parcels doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a lot more spot zoning. I don't think that that's necessarily true. It could happen, but it's really, that function is governed by council when they review the petitions. Should be.
Okay, cool. And so for me, you know, yeah, 50 is truly making an impact. It's saying this area is going to, we hope in the future this area will trend towards this. And we hope in the future this area will trend towards this. But lowering it, if it's not illegal, then whatever. I'm not, but for me to look at the 100 acres with 100% of the signatures, that to me is saying, you know, if we want to encourage people to zone their property so that in the future we can say, okay, here's an area that we know wants to stay this way, and here's an area that we know wants to go this way. If we want to encourage participation, 100 acres with 100% signatures is a burden. I mean, I love agricultural land, and I would look at that and go, oh my gosh, that's quite a burden. But to look at 50 acres, that's not a burden. That might be more encouraging. 25 might be even more encouraging, but I think 50 is more inviting than 100, certainly.
Oh, can that, Adam, can you explain, are we looking at 2 options up here or 3 options?
So the first option here would be removing a completely acreage requirement.
Okay.
Second, this is the same thing that I showed you all last meeting or so. These are just some numbers we want to put in lieu of 200, and they all have their kind of rationale next to it as far as, as opposed to why 200. 200 kind of seemed like a number pulled out of air. At least in a year, 5 years, when people go to look at this, if it doesn't get solved this evening, they'll say, okay, well, at least they chose 32.5 because, it was an agricultural parcel size. This one, because as if the waters weren't muddy enough, I decided to throw another option in there and look at it from an end use point of view, as opposed to saying, regardless of what you want to do, you have to have 200 acres. Saying, well, what do you want to do? Okay, well, if you want to, because you all obviously know what all these mean off the top of your head. This is industrial. So if you want to do, say, like industrial, in order to rezone to industrial, which would provide the same protections for agriculture as it would for industrial, that's another area that kind of needs protection, so to speak, of zoning. Because if you're moving next door to a industrial district, you have that in your head, just like agricultural. Then these are all your residential, commercials. This is ag, conservation, public land development, public lands, and then this is planned development district. And I have reasoning, if we all like a sliding scale, I can go through the numbers and why I chose them. This is just another option to look at it from as a end use versus a blanket use.
And this is all zoning from control-free to these districts?
Yes, sir.
So using this last one, throwing out a scenario, tell me if I'm thinking about this right. I have some foresight. I'm looking somewhere off Highway 11. I see more development starting to surround that, and I'm going, this is going to be a great commercial or industrial spot for my XYZ sometime in the future. While nobody's looking, I'd like to zone that this way before everybody gets in there and start building, and now it all becomes future zoned in a residential capacity. Mm-hmm. I can go ahead with that foresight and block that spot off as industrial.
Correct.
And it's there for me and it's already protected in advance. Mm-hmm. Then I kind of like these sizes if that was going that way, because I'd want to, not necessarily for industrial, but I'd rather, from a commercial standpoint, maybe I'd rather not see somebody with an acre of land go, ooh, I'm going to take these 3 acres and make sure that it's commercial in the future, even though everything else around me is going some other direction. I'm kind of in favor of this third step in some capacity, potentially.
But it's still the 50 acres. If you were doing it, your example, still 50 acres. I still think the 50 acres is a good place for us to stop at this point. Because you got your 25 for your TRD. If you want to go the community commercial or whatever, 15. Now we're dropping down and getting smaller little parcels. We need 50 acres is a good bit of land. It's not an enormous amount of land, but it's a good sized property. We start dropping down to 25 for certain things and 15 for certain things, 10 for others, 5 for this. We get back to that same point to where they're not all, everything's not the same. And I don't mind the sliding scale, but I just think the 50 acres is a good place. It gives enough land to do the bigger parcel like the agricultural and even industrial, but it doesn't do the little spot zoning where you've got an acre here, a 5-acre lot here, a 10-acre lot over there, and each one of them being different. If you're going to get zoning, if you're wanting that so-called protection, you have to have 50 acres, and that's a good sized property, and it serves the same principle as in the beginning when they had the 200 acres.
I don't see county council coming in and doing any additional zoning. I am definitely not a fan of some entity telling me what I can and can't do with my property. At the same time, we are telling people what they can and can't do with their property by having 200 or 100, and we should change that.
I think 50 is a reasonable, for me, I mean, I think 50 is a large enough tract to start a trend in the area without being cumbersome to the person who is, to the property owner or owners who might be wanting to zone.
Is there any other discussion?
I'm still in favor of 0. And it'll let the people that want to be in the zoning matrix go into the zoning matrix, and let the people that don't want to remain in control free. But as long as we got the 100%, I'll go with any of these.
So long as we're up at 100% signatures.
So we need a motion?
Yes.
Okay, see if I got this right. I'd like to make a motion that we set the acreage in control-free in method 2 to 50 acres and require that every person wanting to sign the petition, 100% participation.
So we would
That-
get adopted in the middle.
Would be adopted in the middle, option 2, I guess, or whatever. But set it at 50 acres and require 100% participation in the petition, signing.
So,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, if I understand, just to recast the motion or restate it, same motion that passed that's been reconsidered that had the 100 acres previously, simply just reducing it to 50 acres. All of the other language that was in there that required the contiguity, touching, and required 100% ownership, all that's staying the same. So it's just reducing 100 to 50, right?
Yes. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? My only comment is that still want to have egg on our face again. I think that our last meeting didn't put the egg on our faces. So if everybody is in agreement with this,
I'm not.
okay. Any direction?
My personal, well, now if I say something, it's gonna get personal, so I just think we're fixing something that's not broken, so. My comment.
Ready to vote? All in favor of the 50 acres? Say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
One.
Nay.
Okay, thank you. Proposed Highway 123 corridor overlay ordinance. Are there any comments from the commission?
I read through this and I turned around and wrote one statement that I said I wouldn't do, and that is that stepping into y'all's role to do y'all's part of the job, and I'm not something I wanted to do. In saying that, I read through contracts every day, and so many of them read in such a legal way that you have a hard time understanding what is being really conveyed, what's the essence of the information. We all sit here and describe something that seems to be very clear in the essence of what we're trying to do. When I read this draft, I was in a fog as to, I was getting lost with just verbiage, and then getting lost in some of the legal phrasing. If this is the way a developer, a commercial entity is accustomed to seeing that information, I'm all for it being done that way. If we have flexibility in that, I passed around something that seemed to say, we're wanting to do 123 right now and use it as a template for the future and maybe starting other corridors. And so what I had passed around was something saying, why don't we define a template that contains the intent of why we're running down through gateway corridors, taking that intent for a developer to look at, going through the legal verbiage, and then go through, okay, for 123, here's the special features for 123 that need to be addressed. Whether that be in appearance, whether that be in curb cuts, whether that be in whatever, that we define 123. Then that way, as we move forward into the future, we can say, okay, now let's tackle 59, or now let's tackle this other one. We don't have to go through all the legal language and, oh, this sentence doesn't apply, this sentence does, because we've got a generic template up there. Now all we have to do is define the specifics for that new corridor. And that was kind of some of what I was hoping to do, rather than saying this whole thing is corridor overlay highway 123, to say, this is our template for corridor overlay. Now here's the specific for 123. Does that make sense? Whatever that ends up meaning.
I will make a comment. I really like what you wrote. It's very user-friendly, the purpose and intent on what you passed out. Very user-friendly, very inviting. To me, it would be something that if I read it, I would go, oh, that's cool. As opposed to, oh, come on, what are they doing? So if we could swap that out, I think that would be great. And then I love the idea, unless there's a reason that you would want all the legal mumbo-jumbo at the beginning, so that people have to read it to get to the end, to get to what they want to see, and that's what can I do.
Well, one of the things that was interesting is in a couple of the paragraphs, there was all this jargon of words, and in one sentence that was applicable to the design application we're trying to achieve.
Design.
And so you're going, as a developer, you're going, man, I read through, and they're accustomed to reading through stuff. And again, if that's the way they're accustomed to seeing it from other counties, then so be it. But if I'm trying to sit there and go through something and go, can I do this? What are they trying to get me to do? I had to read through 4 pages to get to one sentence of the design element or the features that I need to be paying attention to as the architect. I also, while I'm talking here, on page 2, it goes from Clemson to the center of Seneca, and it's the 123 corridor. To me, why are we not continuing it on out? 123 does continue on over as far as a commercial corridor. To me, it's that we're snubbing our nose at Clemson and saying, yeah, you can come across the line, but you're going to come across in this way. If this is intended to have a gateway, that gateway exists on both sides of the city. That's just my thought about it. Again, this is only applying to new commercial. Doesn't apply to residential. Doesn't apply for you to use the land the way you've been using the land. It's simply saying if you're a commercial entity, that you're going to have some features that are going to be aesthetically, and you're in a visual path, it's going to be aesthetically pleasing. I'm not sure why we wouldn't carry that all the way across 123. Those are my thoughts.
If I may. So, just so I'm hearing, so is that kind of like trying to reach out to Clemson and
No, I'm
Seneca?
saying it right now, we're saying from Clemson to the city of Seneca is the only area of 123 that we're trying to address. And I'm saying, why are we not addressing from Seneca out towards Westminster? It's going to be a future area of development. And if we're trying to deal with commercial, right now we got all this commercial already between Clemson and 123. If we think this is a good idea, why are we not applying it on the other side as well? If we're afraid to apply it on the other side, then why are we applying it to the Clemson side?
Oh, okay. So,
Because we're doing this to address an aesthetical appearance of commercial property along a gateway corridor. If it's good enough for one side of the road, why is it not good enough for the other side of the road? Especially when the other side of the road, we actually have some chance of controlling what it looks like.
so if I, If I may. So you brought up this and kind of putting all like the bulk stuff at top. So perhaps we could put design at the top. Like, before we break it into the individual corridors.
I just think that design may be more specific as we move, say, around Highway 130 and eventually start looking at what's gonna happen with the Kiwi River project. And that 1,000+ acres sitting on the side, and they do some big planned unit development PUD with commercial application and residential application. And that area may look more rustic than, say, 123, which is significantly more commercialized looking than, say, a small 2-lane, but yet still a gateway corridor. So I think that as we get into design elements, we might get more specific of something more. We've used the word in the past, rustic elegance. It kind of got brushed under the rug. I'm fine with, but as we get, say, over towards the lake, you may want one particular look, whereas if you're going down through a corridor, you may not want that specific of a Bass Pro Shop design from here to Clemson, for example. So I think once you get to the design elements, it really is going to be corridor specific. I think the legalese part of it may be generic to all of them. You follow it this way. If you have an objection to it, you go through this process. If you want to object, you go through this process. I think that would apply to each one of the corridors.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, this may help ease that discussion some, because I think we're setting it up to get ourselves best ready for the workshop with council, right? So what I think this is pretty much Adam tweaked it, but this is borrowed from the Lancaster ordinance, and that's what he was charged to do, and that's the way that they did it, and it apparently has worked. But we don't have to go completely from that. What I can do is just pull out what I think would be the generally applicable legal requirements, and so we'll have a separate slide for those. And then you get into the design things for the discussion, and I think y'all wanted to do that one piece of design at a time. So if that works, I can just do that. I'll pull out those generic legal requirements. Those will be set aside. After y'all have the discussion with the council on how best to go after corridors, then we can see how best to implement or put those criteria so they make the most sense.
Makes sense.
And I'd also ask you that you read this, if it makes sense to, I don't know what to call it. I call it a preamble, but that's obviously, I'm thinking of something that says, if I'm a developer, what's the intent of the information that I'm about to read? So that you're understanding why you're even reading this information. I don't know if that's even usable or not, but.
No, I know what you're saying. I do. I don't know if Lancaster had more than one of these.
No, theirs was for a main. This was for one.
The way they did it, we could do it. I think it could be done better too, and I think that's a good way to approach it. Some of it is, I'll just have to work with them, massage it out, and pull out things that are generally applicable.
I agree.
So what I hear everybody saying, or mainly Mike, is we're trying to have a generic corridor ordinance, or try to make this a generic
Outlines.
generic for all the.
Well, a lot of this
corridors.
information was, here's how you go through the appeals process if you don't like it, or if you feel burdened, you go through this process. Well, those kind of things could apply to any future overlay that's put in there.
So are we eliminating Oconee County Highway 123?
No, we're gonna go through 123, rather than just putting it at the top of the header that this is a Highway 123 corridor. It's my proposal that we say, this is what corridor overlays, this is the process around corridor overlays. Here's what the Highway 123 overlay would look like. And then we could address curb cuts, we could address aesthetics, we could address visual whatevers within that one. But at the same time, if we decide in the future to go down 59, the appeals process is still the same way. If you feel burdened, it's still going to be the same way. So why rewrite all that information? We just go, okay, next overlay is in place. Does that make sense? No?
I think what he's saying is everything that's gonna apply to every corridor, we're gonna put at the beginning. And then you're gonna take each corridor and put what is
These special
specific
features
to that corridor.
to that corridor.
Right, that's what I was saying. So we're eliminating that this draft is for specifically 123.
Right.
Correct.
We're eliminating that.
Mhm.
Right.
Or the first part of this draft, because we're still gonna need to address 123 for council, because that's the first area that they want addressed. So it still needs to be the corridor that we talk about. But there's things that should start. The heading of this document that council's gonna look at shouldn't start with Highway 123 corridor.
I guess how I'm envisioning it, and I don't know if I'm on the same page as Mr. Johnson or not, but after it's all said and done, I guess if we wanna have a number of corridors, you have a first section in the code that talks about corridor overlays, and these are general, legal, applicable to all requirements, and it's just not gonna change no matter what. It's not gonna touch on any of the design, it's not gonna touch on even the 500-foot, any of that. It's just gonna touch on, this is our purpose, this is some of the intent stuff, this is the applicability, this is your legal basis to do it, this is appeal process, probably mainly just those things. And then everything else that's really would be specific to the corridor would be
Separate.
thereafter.
Would be
So-
thereafter, and
So
that's
then-
exactly what I'm.
So then after that, then corridor 123 would be identified with its specific
Right.
requirements. Then down the road,
So you're only having to read all
59,
the legal
28
jumbo
could be,
once.
yeah,
Right, so we
Yes.
have-
And they all could be added. to
that
the
seems
same-
very reasonable to me.
Could they all be added to the same ordinance?
Well,
I mean, if we have this one
we
ordinance,
codified this thing,
And we
essentially.
could just drop down after we do 123, just drop down under it and then start, say, 59. This is the 59 corridor and do that one, and then when we get that, start another 28 overlay.
Yeah, they'd be separate ordinances in time, but they would be adopting and using the same general requirements. So they may be in whatever chapter, sections 1 through 4 of these corridor overlay general requirements. And then you have, section 5 is 123, section 6 is.
And I think that that's an ideal way to do it, because half of these paragraphs have the words 123 in them, and now we're changing it to something else each time. Let's just do the generic, get all the legal stuff out of the way, and then drop down, and that way we can specifically focus on what needs to apply for this road.
I agree.
Sounds good.
Okay, one thing, you're talking about 123 from Clemson to Seneca. From Seneca to Westminster, the character of the neighborhood is completely different, and then from Westminster onto the Georgia line is a whole nother territory again. I don't know that one brush can paint all three.
And I don't know, I'm just playing devil's advocate, that I think that if you do just one section, if you're trying, I like the rural aspect of what here to Westminster looks like. I think this is helping us keep something like that. Because if we're about to tell part of 123, hey, y'all need to have some design elements when you think about building here, and they need to fit with the surroundings. Whereas right now, somebody could come in and do whatever they wanted to do between here and Westminster. And I'm saying if we think it's good enough to control some of the design elements from here to Clemson, why do we not think it's a good idea to control some of the design elements? Because I actually like that direction of the road better. I'd kind of like to see that it doesn't get screwed up.
But by doing it this way, I mean, from Clemson to Seneca could be one corridor, and from 123 to Westminster
And
could
do
be
we
another
need to name it
corridor
something different?
with
Right.
different requirements. So-
And I think we probably ought to address them maybe
In
at the same
essence-
time, so that when we bring this to county council, that they're looking at this as a whole potentially of 123.
So we'd go from the Georgia line all the way to the Pickens County line.
Even if they had different requirements or different aesthetic
Sure.
looks to them.
You just had different names for it, like you said, you just had different names to it. Mhm. So
I just
that's-
think if we get a chance to get in front of council with 123, we should try to address it all, if we could.
You're just not thinking about one side of it, thinking of the whole thing.
That's just a thought. I mean,
Well, 123 over towards Georgia, we're never, ever gonna have the kind of housing situation that we're getting between Clemson and.
Right, that's why you would have it broken up into the different.
we say
Areas.
that, but never ever is a long time.
I was gonna say, and if you talk to anybody that used to farm in Hiawassee, they're gonna tell you, mm-mm.
I mean, you look at Commerce, Georgia's already talking about coming this way. So, because congestion and everything else, as that continues to grow, people are gonna go, I gotta get out of that growth. You're right, it's not any time in the near future gonna be at Clemson.
But that's why they call us planning.
And I think we definitely need to name the Clemson Inn something other than just 123 corridor, because it's not gonna fit from one end of 123
To the other? Yeah, I would
I think we
agree.
need to change the name.
If I may, like, so we could do the 123 quarter, just like we're breaking up, putting all the legalese up top, and we'll have 123, and then 123
You could have
ABC,
123 south,
or however
123
you want to
mid,
call it.
123 north or something.
Yeah, and then that way it would all be underneath kind of a little more logical approach.
Yes.
So for, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, so for the council meeting, for the workshop, or do you want Adam to have a 123B? Something that's a little bit different, that's more rural from?
I think that we ought to have the
West
template
Minster?
there, so that at the workshop, we could potentially start filling in some stuff. I'd like council's opinion on whether they want to start working on this in a serious nature, or if they want to just say, hey, there's 18 lots left on between here and Clemson, and sure, let's do it, or let's don't do it. I mean, the reality is that we're either planning for the future, or we're not planning for the future.
But I think we're getting to the purpose of this workshop is, what does council want us to do? Are we creating these, we had the direction to create the corridors, but now that we're creating them, is that really what we want to do? And I think that's,
Right.
I think by having something like this, then they're gonna realize that not all these corridors are the same. Not that they don't, but, again, when all of a sudden you have to start putting this down in writing, 59 is different than 130, and 28 is different than 123, and that's, and again, I go back to, I think we need to, if we go down this road, we need, no pun intended, but if we go down this road, we've got to keep it relatively simple, or else we're gonna end up with 500 pages
Of junk.
of junk,
Yep.
and that nobody can understand.
If I may. So if we came up with the legalese portion, the preamble, as it were, that'd be something we could fill out pretty completely. That wouldn't be very, so much open to discussion. Not to say you guys could talk about it, but it'd be Mr. Root's house, it'd be the legalese side of it. And then under that, so for the 123 A, B, and C, I could just literally just print this out without the words on it, put purpose and intent kind of thing, and maybe some bullet points like that, or would you like more formed
I
things?
think the bullet points would be.
I think, yeah,
I think the bullet points would be a good place to start.
Sure.
One thing that I would ask that you evaluate in your process, that I read in here, seemed to say if any part of the development starts any part of that property starts in the corridor, that all of it applies. And I'm sitting there going, okay, you've got this little road that runs between a couple of commercial buildings that goes back behind Walmart and opens up to 20 acres. Nobody's gonna see it back there, but because I actually own the road and it's not an easement, now part of my property is in the overlay, so I'm way back behind Walmart and I still have to apply. I think that there needs to be something that talks about in view or something of that nature. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, because I dealt with, not with that, but that gentleman had to own his own road that came off of putting a storage unit. But yeah, that's interesting that you said that. I hadn't thought about that. No, it's an excellent point.
So wherever that fits in there, that's the only other thing I'd like to mention. Does that make sense?
Adam, before the meeting with council, could you possibly get us some maps that show property in these three areas that could be developed commercially? We've already got the one from Seneca to Clemson, we've got that, but from Seneca back to Westminster, and from the other side of Westminster to the Georgia line, a property that could possibly be developed into something, see how much open is there.
Yes, I could make the maps of the area and show the parcels and kind of do the math for it, and figure out like how many, at the moment, open parcels are. Certainly, I could do that. I'll probably I was thinking about making just very large, like table size maps.
That'd be cool, yeah.
Like something like arts and crafts, essentially. You all get to doodle on it, say where it is. It's when we're like this, like we're all talking about things, but if you all were standing in front of a map around a table right now, there would be pens flying, ink going. So that's kind of what I was leaning towards doing that.
And also potential overlay corridor areas.
Additional to A, B, and C of 123, since that seems what we're doing. Sure, so which other ones in particular?
You got 28 between Seneca and Walhalla, and does it matter from Walhalla up, because that's mostly national
I think it's
forest?
here
I don't
to
mean matter,
Walhalla
but I mean,
is
a lot
yeah.
of it's national forest.
I think here to Walhalla is a future area that we need
Certainly
to
from here to
either
Walhalla.
have the opportunity to kind of structure or not.
Like you said, above Walhalla's National Forest.
Above Walhalla, I don't know where the national forest line is, but
I wouldn't think you would need it passed from city to city.
pass from city to city, and then 59 from probably Seneca to Fairplay.
I think that one, the 59 would
130
probably
is not a
be
corridor.
better.
Certainly from
From
Crossroads.
20
Until, but
Fairplay.
again,
Really,
that
I think
Kiwi,
when
what's that
Seneca
Kiwi River?
24 is pretty much,
Done,
Yeah,
24
it's-
to.
That's a good
there might be
start.
a lot, a parcel or two, but that's all.
But from 24 to Fairplay.
24 to Fairplay, 59.
From 24 down
59
59. to
Hike.
Fairplay.
So
some point,
on 59,
somebody
from
do
24
something
to
on that
Fairplay.
Kiwi River project.
And
I think that if we can at least start getting people talking about other areas, we're good.
probably 130.
Right.
Probably a PPD though. Just give us another one to look at.
130 from where it turns off of 11, or not 11.
Mike, where was you thinking, the 130?
From behind Ingles?
You know, and I think that 130 is maybe a second tier conversation.
Okay.
I mean, 130 is really not a corridor, so to speak.
It's a pretty drive.
I'm sorry?
Well,
It's a pretty drive. I mean,
That was a very nice drive.
Scenic highway.
so 123 A, B, and C, 59 from 24 to Fairplay, and then 28 from here to Seneca. Are there any other those kind of maps we're thinking about?
That's a good start.
I think that's a good
That's a
start.
good
That's a good start. I don't
Okay.
think we
Bring
want
dinner
to
and a camera.
go overboard.
No worries. I'll send you all the bill for the ink. So I'll make a aerial map of that with the parcels laid out. So you'll see all the little lines where all the parcels are. I'll figure out how many of those already have buildings on them as best as possible, because our imagery is from 2015, so some things have gone into them, but I can kind of brute force it. Is there any other information you'd like to see on those maps, or other kind of things that I can bring, like tools for you all to say, this is like this, so to speak? Or if you think about it in the course of, we have 3 more meetings or 2 more meetings after this, just let me know, because I can, with Miss Lisa Simmering, who's our GIS person, she's excellent, so I can get her to help me make maps. So if you think of something, let me know.
One other thing while I'm thinking about it, you had mentioned in here multifamily. I think that it really ought to be a multifamily over, say, 6 units, personal opinion. I think a duplex, to me, is still a residential. My grandmother lives on one side and I live on the other kind of housing. I don't think that this should apply to anything but commercial and a higher level of multifamily.
Okay.
You know, a couple of duplexes out there, to me, that's still family.
Yeah.
All good points. That give you enough to roll with?
Actually, since I have y'all here, and I hate to drag it out, so you said bullet points, and because since we're kind of on maybe not a time crunch, but I'm still looking at the 24th as just because that's the date we have. Is there any particular, in the individual sections, so design or parking in particular and access, since those are the 2 kind of hot buttons, are there any individual things that I can pull out of there to put in, or should I just leave them blank, or what?
I think that you've got some good things as examples maybe in here of things that we should be considering.
Okay,
Well, on page 6, you got building material standards. Mr. Smith has been working very hardly to come up with a definition that I think is getting pretty close to what we're all trying to achieve, but without getting into these percentages that are really hard to interpret when somebody puts a plan in front of you. So I'd like to introduce, and then I think everybody has a copy of design standards. A lot of things in there I agree with. I think Mike and I have discussed this numerous times. I still think this needs to be carefully worded, that we do not create a de facto architectural review committee or architectural review board. I think this needs to be more of stated legally, this is what we're looking for, but, you know, there's still, you know, we want you to do this, but, you know, without saying we're gonna require you to do this, you know, make it part of it, but not make it, you know, law of the land. I know you're very creative at doing that stuff.
So you're saying you wanna make these, some of, I think catch exactly what part, but permissive, as far as the design standards or facade, permissive rather than mandatory? I mean, these are suggestions.
Yeah, well, I mean, and Mr. Smith in the audience, he shot several things to me, you know, or several variations of this and kind of watered down the enforcement aspect of it. I just don't want to create a, you know, like I said, a pseudo or de facto architectural review committee, you know, that where we're going to require you to build your building like this. You know, like on page 6, you know, 4A, timber framing column similar, you know, 50%, you know. I said, how do you measure, is that the face area of a timber? Is that the volume of a timber? Is that the, so that, all these percentages have gone away in this, and this is saying, this is kind of what we're looking for. And I think this is the best start we have. I'm not saying this is it, but I'm saying this is the best start for us to start looking at. And I'd like to introduce that into this for people to comment on.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a problem with the way this materials thing's stated. The way I'm reading it, every building's got to have 15% minimum
Yeah,
timber.
that's what I'm saying.
It's got to have 20% minimum stone.
That's what I'm saying. Throw that away and read this. And I think this reads a lot smoother.
Yeah, definitely do.
I mean, for the most part, and there's gonna be a few rogue folks out there, but for the most part, developers wanna be popular in whatever they're doing. And if we as a community say, these are the elements that this community is looking for the most part, a developer is going to want to say, well, what is the community looking for out of me as in building?
Yeah, I don't think that he's implying that you want to make it where they can come in and say, well, I don't want to follow any of that stuff. But what he's saying is, we're not going to tell you it has to be X amount of wood or X amount of stucco. We're going to say, we would like for you to build it with timber and stone and stucco, but it's up to you to figure out how you want to do it, right? Instead, in other words, I think basically just, if you take out the materials with the percentages description and slip in the Carter Overlay Design Standards Option 1, Revision 1, that's encouraging people to use those materials, but not saying, here's how you have to do it. Does that make sense? Is that right? Is that what you're trying to say? That's what I heard.
I see some frowning from staff, and I'm assuming it's because they're going, man, how do we even encourage or force or have teeth to something that is now an encouragement?
Yep.
That said, I think that maybe that's the conversation that we have and at getting together with council. These are still bullet points, I think, that are bullet points that need to be talked about so that council can help us with direction of saying, I don't like that line at all. Ooh, I love this line, and the percentage should be da-da-da-da. But I think that way council is helping with those kind of directives. We don't want to go through this exercise and then council say, thanks, but no thanks.
Can I ask a really dumb question? What's non-glazed? Is that anything that's not a window?
What's non-glazed?
No glass in the window?
Anything that's not a window? Right.
You as a builder are asking me what's non-glazed?
You wrote it.
You wrote it.
I mean, it's non-glazed. It's something that is not glass.
I'll make sure I was understanding you correctly.
Yes, there is, yes. I, read down there further, also, there's a sentence in there about pictures. And pictures are worth millions of words.
Yeah.
But the pictures have to be very selective, so, very carefully selected.
I just really have a hard time with, the one that's currently in there as far as percentages. I mean, that's work on you, and you're gonna have to sit there and get a plan and measure the number, the square feet of timbers, and is that 15% of what, and 20% of what, and 10% of, And I think, this has, like I said, I think this is the best thing that we've had so far that gets what we're trying to do without saying, with a sledgehammer, here's what you have to do. Soft colors, natural colors, that kind of stuff.
Okay. Mr. Markovich, just real quick.
I read joint and several responsibility. It might slightly be termed differently from joint and several liability, but if you want to ever see anything but the butt of a developer leaving this county, you better get rid of joint and several liability when it comes to your common area maintenance. Because you structure, there's a whole paragraph in there about common area maintenance if you're over 40,000 square feet, I think is what it is. Anytime you develop a property and you're leasing properties, you build in you have a common area maintenance agreement with all of your leases. It's bound by your lease restrictions. You don't need a separate thing that says you're going to have joint and several liability on that particular requirement. And if you do, I'm serious, no businessman in his right mind is going to sign into joint and several liability.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, that's excellent input. I'm not a builder. I did copy and paste most of this from Lancaster County, so that kind of input's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just had a couple other, just real quickly, page 7 of 20, it says chain link welder, woven wire, and other similar fencing are not permitted in the highway corridor overlay. There's nothing I hate worse than fences. But at the very bottom, if you think about the properties, I was trying to think of the ones over there next to Food Line. Those will be in the corridor, I believe, even though they're there now. They'll be grandfathered, all that stuff. But on a large tract like that, to say that they have to have brick, stone, masonry, wood, metal, to me, that would be cost prohibitive to a builder if he's trying, and again, looking in the future, you can't leave anything sitting still anymore in our area or it's gone. So if they want to have a secure piece of property, they might need a more cost-effective way to, say, do the back of their property, especially if it's not viewed. I'm trying to think of any malls or shopping areas that might come into that. So I hate to see this say not permitted. That might need to be up for discussion as to how you could phrase that so that as long as it was not, I don't know.
So if I were to write this and say along parallel to 123 ABC wherever, you can't have that, but perpendicular or otherwise.
Well, not perpendicular.
Or about
but
just
within
not,
feet of the
just
thing,
not
but-
off of
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Okay,
There you go.
certainly I can do that.
On page 9 of 20, I didn't get where we said that we would require that they be maintained, the trees be maintained. Because it's easy to plant a tree, but 5 years later, whether or not it's still there is a whole nother thing in this neck of the woods.
On page 9.
On the very top, you've got, on the bottom of 8, such spaces shall include canopy trees that provide shade, at installation of canopy tree, blah, blah, blah. Such spaces shall be accessible from sidewalks and other. Somewhere in there, we need to say that the trees must be maintained, not just planted. You gotta keep them. You gotta keep them alive and flourishing and growing. Because you can plant them when you build the thing and then you're gone and there's no shade tree. So they should have the responsibility of keeping them maintained. And then the last one that I found, page 15 of 20. Under wall signs, wall signage shall not exceed 15% of the wall area per wall face. But in another place, we said that they could use artwork. Is there a conflict there, or can someone paint the side of their building with a mural of the mountains or deer running through the woods or whatever, and that be approved and not interfere with this wall signage shall not exceed 15% of the wall area?
So perhaps I define what signage is.
Okay, I mean, whatever.
And then if they were gonna paint something, it would fall inside the design aesthetic scheme,
art.
so they'd have to use the muted colors or what have you, for whatever they're gonna paint on the rest of the wall, but the sign itself be that. So yeah, so I can define what a sign is.
The sign being
great.
the
That's a
name
great
of the
point.
business.
See Diamond Brand Outfitters, and they're constantly painting murals on their
Yeah.
buildings.
So those look good, I like public art. Public art's a benefit.
Yeah. That's my only questions.
Have we come up with any height restrictions on signs?
Just don't bring that up.
I didn't find anything.
I didn't find anything here, so they can have a sign, a pole sign, 200 feet in the air with a big sign on it.
Trying to get you something.
And that is one, to me, one of the reasons to have a
Hold
corridor,
on.
to eliminate the tall
Hold on.
and the I-85 corridor, signage.
It's page 14.
Yes.
If I may, in response to Mr. Pearson. So on page 14, number 3, it says signs allowed. It says allowable signs. So this comes directly from Appendix A in our current code. It's not great, it's gray. So definitely putting a more definitive, the sign of the height shall be no more than, would be beneficial, because I just kind of copy and paste. My assumption was that anything in Appendix A would be kind of ironed out already. Perhaps not on all occasions. So I can definitely put that in. So how high a sign do we want to have?
I don't know, 20 or 25 feet that's a two-story building.
Rock,
That's
paper,
pretty
scissors.
big
I'm saying
sign.
no
15,
higher.
10 or 15?
I like 10
I
or
was,
15.
I'm liking 15, no higher than 20, it'd be maximum, but
So you're saying no more billboards on 123?
no more Well, they gonna have the billboard, but but for your business sign, or the signs that they put out front, there's got to be a height limit on that, or you're gonna go down 123 or wherever, and you're gonna have all these signs, and they're gonna be at different heights. And it's gonna look worse than easily ever thought about looking.
Do we not already have height limits in the sign ordinance we worked on?
Do we?
We do. I believe we do.
Did it put it in your code?
I mean,
I looked today. There's
by
not.
putting signage in here,
65
by putting
feet.
signage in here, are we confusing the matter?
I think 65.
Sorry, sir?
65
By putting
feet.
signage back in here, are we confusing the matter or contradicting a part of our other ordinances that we already have?
Well, yeah, this overlay inherently will contradict other parts, or either by disallowing or allowing certain things. Controlling signage is, I think, is an important part. I think this was went over before I got here. You guys kind of sent something through. I think with the design aesthetic, putting it towards the signage wouldn't be hurtful either. If we're gonna design the buildings, it makes no sense for us to have a Dollar General that's beautiful and artistic with wood and stone, and they have I just use the Dollar General because I know that was a hot button issue not too long ago. But as far as the height of the sign, I mean, that's up to y'all. I don't really know any metrics on signage. I don't know if
I think
anybody.
10 feet for that is, again, if you drive through Clemson now, they have a limit on their signs where you're not seeing the great big McDonald's sign.
I mean, we have a sightings ordinance and we've got 6 pages of signage stuff in here.
That comes directly from Appendix A. I instead of just saying to Appendix A, I just copy and pasted it into there.
But
Our existing signage ordinance will cover the overlay, except in exceptions that we make. either more restrictive or less restrictive. But the overlay doesn't throw out the existing signage ordinance, am I correct?
Correct, and all of this, like Adam said, was, I mean, you're changing what's there, general requirements, general or no requirements as far as aesthetics, general requirements as far as signs, you're making, for the most part, you're making them more restrictive, so yeah, there's gonna be, it's not a conflict, well, it is a conflict in a sense, I mean, you're changing how, from being free and wide open to, all right, you're gonna do it this way, this way, and this way, and so it applies to the signs. Yeah, it's saying that signs are gonna be treated differently along 123 because we want 123 to look a certain way. But that's, I guess, the whole notion of this enterprise.
Well, we really don't need to address anything about signage unless we want it different from our existing signage.
Correct.
I do want it different than what our existing ordinance says. It says you can put 165 feet in the air.
But we need to keep in mind that it's not what I want, it's what this county wants. When you say, I want it different.
We are representing this county. We are trying to do what we think, because we don't have a lot of people show up at our meetings to tell us, so we have to take it upon ourselves to think what our area or our people that we actually talk to would like. Most of the people I've talked to don't want to see, 65 feet signs, just like you're going down 85. They want to keep the signage a little lower, and we've already got the size down a little bit. I mean, we could do it like the Highway 11, the scenic highway, and have no billboards on it if that's so what we want in the corridor. Everywhere else is fine, but we can set the corridor up where there's no billboards, or we can set it up to where we want specific signs.
Well, we've already taken billboards off of 2-lane highways. We've taken them off of Highway 11. We have nowhere left to advertise in this county. If we take them off of, businesses need to advertise. Businesses have a right to try to grow their business in this county. If they don't, then we're gonna die.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
If I
yes.
could, what may help, again, setting it up for the workshop is for Adam to have, whether we have these quantitative things or numeric things, like 15% for wall signage, or 15 or 10 feet for height, to then say in italicized or blank, so y'all could then with the council discuss,
Like, this is what we want to do, or no, we don't want to have any restriction there, so as opposed to having that battle now, because I think you're gonna have that collective roundtable, it may be good to have the blank.
And that's why I think the template is important, because that way when we get with council, I mean, council may come in and go, that is not the direction we're wanting to go at all. And so no use working through some of the finite details until we get some big boundaries from council.
Mr. Smith, you have one comment?
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Let's not try to get too specific. I had shown you pictures of signs, the height of them and whatever, many times. And it is going to be a problem area in these corridors. I think some areas in Clemson had tied them to the height of the roof of that particular structure, less a certain amount. And when you went through that area, the signs that were pole signs were fairly short or close to the ground.
That must be why they got a 2-story car wash.
Very small sign out there.
Yeah.
That may be true. I always wondered that.
Did anybody else have any other comments on this? Adam?
Yes, sir. So the letter that came from council to you all, I have, and then initially when we started kind of kicking the tires on this, we talked about transportation issues. If that seemed like a pretty big issue at the beginning, like of trying to maintain traffic or, dissuade traffic. So for our meeting, I'd like to, if you all would like me to, I'd like to bring in Kyle Reed. He's in charge of roads and bridges for Oconee County. Because you all may have questions that are like, oh, why can't we just make this left turn? He may have a functional reason as to, well, it's to X, Y, or Z. Also, since 123 happens to be a state road, I'd like to be able to contact SCDOT, because they have a rep for this area, and perhaps they could come to the meeting. That way, while we're kind of asking questions, we don't have to do research for 3 months later for us to get back together. Maybe somebody at the table would have some information. Now, I don't know if that's too many people outside for this meeting or not, but let me know your feedback regarding bringing those people
I
in.
think that might be helpful, because I'd hate to get all the way down the road and then find out something that we've done is completely wrong. And it may be encouraging to council too, if the state DOT is going, yeah, y'all really should have something that has less curb cuts, or something.
But on the other hand, I'd hate to be that DOT guy standing here and being called on to know something without having an opportunity to look it up and answer that question.
Oh, let me get back with you on that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's up, if he's willing to come and stick his neck out like that.
I'd just like to ask permission. I wanted to ask permission before I asked anyone else. I haven't asked either of those people yet. I just wanted to make sure that was something that you all were on board with.
Mr. Markovich, did you have a comment? I know you do.
I did, but it was just about to pass, so.
Oh, well, sit back down then.
The only thing, when it comes to signs, and you've got what is the beginnings of a tree preservation mechanism in here, which really raises my anxiety, but nonetheless, I don't have issues with coming up with special things for signs in that corridor and whatnot, but invariably what you're gonna end up with is what many communities have, which is a tree ordinance and a sign ordinance, and you're gonna end up with all your trees blocking all your signs so nobody can see the signs. I can't tell you how many communities I can drive into and I know they got a tree ordinance and they got a sign ordinance, and all the trees block all the signs. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
And it makes it so hard to see when you're trying to pull out, when you've got trees lined up, you've got signs lined up that are not very high, they're right in your direct line. It makes it dangerous.
Go to Hilton Head. Can't even find Walmart.
Okay, so are we finished on this? Any other comments? Adam, you have enough to,
Enough to get myself in trouble with, sir. Yes, I
Yeah.
do.
Mr. Root, do you have anything else on that? All right, thanks. Any old business? Any new business?
I just have one question. And almost embarrassed to ask this, but I just want to clarify. Control free, that is a zoning district. Is that correct?
You shouldn't be embarrassed to ask that question, because it's a really good question. It's not a zoning district in the sense of being on the zoning use matrix, but I think most people would consider it one, because there are requirements, certainly the setbacks that apply to it is the sexual oriented businesses, communication towers, tattoo facilities, all these things are gonna apply throughout the county, so it would, by virtue of that, apply to the control-free district. So it's not control-free in that sense, so there are land use restrictions on it. So it's not the same as all of the other ones, because all of the other ones, you have this myriad list of things. You can do a barber shop, you can do a gas station, permitted, not permitted, conditionally permitted, special exception. It's not on that. If it were, it'd pretty much have P's as permitted all the way down there, but that's a discussion y'all started having at one point. I think that was when I first got here a couple of years ago, that discussion was being had about turning it into general use district and go ahead and putting it up there.
But there are, there are restrictions.
There are land use restrictions.
So why isn't then that on the zoning matrix is you can't do certain things in there?
I think the reason is, and I wasn't here when it happened, that
Right.
the setbacks weren't generally applied there, and I think that's probably the biggest thing. As far as taking the sexually oriented businesses, which were in place, when they didn't put control free in, they just looked at those separately and, all right, we're not gonna put these into the middle of a housing complex or near a church or near a synagogue or anything like this. So just within the county, this sexually oriented business ordinance is just separate. But it does apply everywhere, so it applies in control-free districts. Why control-free wasn't put in the zoning use matrix, I'm sure it was because they wanted the county to be, as I read it, to be considered control-free except for these few areas. which are your zoning districts, which are different, because they do have a lot more restrictions on them, they are outlined. Why they didn't put control-free in there and then just put permitted by everyone, I don't know. I know that it was considered to be a difference, like I said, a placeholder, I guess, trying to recreate history some. When it's talked about in the comprehensive plan, it's talked about being something more akin to a placeholder where, you know, that it didn't envision at that time restrictions coming on it, that you're not gonna be able to build a gas station or whatever. You still can, but there are some.
Because I think that's part of, I mean, to me, it's part of the confusion up here and then the public. I mean, when they say control-free, it's the wild, wild west. But there are restrictions, but it never shows up, you know, we got, you know, this up here, it doesn't show up as a zoning district, but yet there are restrictions.
Yeah,
So-
I think it's because of the restrictions, and I don't know, some of y'all are here certainly longer than I, why it was ever jettisoned and not put on there, I don't know, but the restrictions are different than the restrictions on the other ones. I mean, now there's setbacks, and then the general performance standard things that apply to, like I say, tattoo facilities and communication towers and sexually oriented businesses apply to it, but not all of these other ones. If you look at the zoning use matrix and go down it, those ones, those restrictions aren't applicable to the control-free district, so. Why it's not up there, I don't know.
You know, I just think in the future, we probably might need to revisit that, and I think that would probably clarify a lot of people's questions or misunderstandings or understandings. I don't know what it is, but it just seems like, I mean, it's control-free. Again, those two words to me don't go together. And why it was ever called that instead of general use or whatever, I think general use sounds a whole lot better, but you know, if we try and change it from control-free to general use, everybody thinks they're going to be getting rezoned, and we don't need that argument. So, I don't know. I just think, you know, I mean, there are restrictions, so to me, it is a quote zoning district. Or you know, if there was no restrictions, then yeah, it's wide open, but it's not. So, I just think to me, that's adding to some of our confusion or some of our back and forth up here, and the same thing with the public of, well, I live in control-free. Well, yeah, but there's still restrictions in control-free. And why it's not on the zoning matrix, you know, I'm not, I haven't been up here long enough to understand that either. Gwen might be.
I'm the historical one on here, I guess I can. It's been defeated several times. It's been proposed and defeated by council, so that's why it's not on there.
Even by this council.
Even by the current council, correct. So that's why it's not on there.
Just ask the question.
Yep.
If I may, that question, that causes me the most work out of everything. We were talking about small area rezoning, how that would cause work. Control-free district causes me the most work. Hey, I bought a piece of property, it's unrestricted. Why are you telling me I have to be off? It's not unrestricted. Well, the guy who sold to me said it's unrestricted. Like, that's probably a 3-4 time a week thing.
That's why we
Is it just
kept-
with the setbacks?
Oh, because really that's all we have. So yeah, it's just with setbacks. And people like submitting site plans and things like that just, you know, they're too close A, B, or C. Yeah, but it's just because setbacks are the only thing that are for my wheelhouse. Setbacks and height, no one's going 65 feet recently. So yeah, just setbacks. But that's actually the biggest thing that causes me work, like additional like.
Sounds like a good agenda item.
I think we suggested no setbacks there.
That was the
A few meetings ago.
multifamily housing thing we're gonna discuss again, that was the shortcut, I won't say shortcut route, that was the easiest way to rectify that problem, as we talked about, it was that option of pulling the setbacks out, control-free altogether. That was one option that y'all had in front of you. We didn't have that on tonight's agenda, but
Yeah,
it'll be back on.
we left them in there because prior to having them, their number one problem was dealing with the fact that people had plans and they got up here and then they were over someone else's something or under
Yeah.
something without the setbacks. And so you were dealing with the other end of it where they had planned something without setbacks and.
Yeah, just the
doesn't.
name.
So it's a problem one way or the other.
Certainly.
So.
I think most of you know that I have resigned from the planning commission, unfortunately, but it's due to business. So tonight's my last night, but I just want to say that I thoroughly enjoyed working with everybody, and Tom and Mike and your public comment has been great, Mr. Root and Adam, so
Sure.
appreciate it.
We appreciate
So,
your time, sir.
at this time, do we need to, Mr. Kisker will be the chair, do we need to elect a vice chair?
Mr. Kisker would be the acting chair. I mean, do you have like a pro tem, anyone after? Do we just have the vice? Well,
just have
I think,
vice,
yeah, probably be good to, I don't know if Mr. Kane has, do you know if he has a replacement?
Not yet, no.
Nominate tomorrow?
No.
So then let's just put on the agenda to nominate an interim vice chair for next week, or 2 weeks from now.
Okay.
And then when the time comes, I mean, you could go ahead and nominate a new chair next time. You don't have to, you don't have a quorum. But it makes sense to have that District 3 rep in, so everyone's, you got your full commission. It's really up to y'all. You can do it either way. You could, one way would be to, all right, let's have Mr. Kisker act as chairman until we get a District 3 rep, and then we'll go ahead and have nominations for the new chairman. Or you could put it on to nominate a new chairman next meeting. Out of District 3 rep.
Right, that'd be your call.
What are the options?
One option would be to hold tight on electing a new chair until you get Mr. Omby's.
Let's hold tight till we get
replacement.
a full commission. It'd be my opinion to get.
It makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
I understand
till
that
we
a lot
get
of
full.
folks a lot of entities would do it that way. And so then next time we'll just have on the agenda nominating an interim vice chair, just in case you're not here, someone who can take over until you get to the point of having a chair nomination and election. Makes sense.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Get some new ventures.